This is the World Organic News for the week ending 18th of March 2019. John Moore reporting. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. The decline of honeybees from colony collapse disorder to pesticide effects has been well documented over the past decade or so. The news has been all bad, but there is hope. From the blog Cool Bees comes the post Slovenia's Bee Protections. Quote, unlike the worldwide trend of bee population decline, there is one nation that stands out, Slovenia. This is no accident, and bees are incredibly well protected within the country. Where countries like the US and France have seen over 30% losses in winter of 2018, Slovenia has maintained beneath the acceptable loss of under 20%. Slovenia is an oddity worldwide and an outlier in terms of these results. End quote. This is enough to pique my interest. We live in a big world despite the so-called shrinking global village understanding of the interwebs types. This means different polities can conduct different approaches to problems. What works can be spread across the rest of the world. Unfortunately, the converse can happen too. Think of the spread of industrial ags, feedlots and so on. More of that later in our second post for this week. Back to the bees. Slovenia has a set of protections in place as well as a mindset towards bees. It's about getting people involved. A distributed beekeeping community ensures a variety of approaches and localised losses and gains. The downside of bee losses far outweighs the positives of gains. If only a few people increase their honey production, the world still functions. If only a few areas lose their hives, the world still functions. Quote, most of the beekeepers in Slovenia aren't commercial or run by larger companies. In fact, even the nation's Prime Minister keeps bees, and 1 in 200 Slovenian citizens keep them as well. The government offers courses for free on how to start beekeeping, as well as distributing treatments to prevent varroa mites. End quote. Without huge commercial domination, a loss of hives for a family, while not good for them, does not destroy the pollination services of a large part of the agricultural economy. The system still functions. In places where commercial activity dominates pollination services, a blow to the collective hives in one location, like the California almond groves, can be catastrophic. It's not just the distributed colonies and egalitarian ownership of said hives. The education and extension support of the Slovenian government is critical. And given the distributed nature of beekeeping, urban hives are quite common. This, of course, raises the question of swarming. Quote, inside the capital, Ljubljanka, a rapid bee response team consisting of 7 people is on call to prevent swarms. Despite the capital being noticeably urban, there are around 4,500 hives in the city alone, making it essential for them to prevent swarming hives from impacting the population. End quote. A thoughtful set of policies, a distributed bee population and a good news story. I don't get to report these often enough. Now back to the nasty realities of the world, drenched as it is in glyphosate over the past 40-odd years. From the site Global Glyphosate Study comes a post entitled Global Glyphosate Study Pilot Phase Shows Reproductive and Developmental Effects at Safe Dose. Now there's a title to chill the marrow. Quote, a new study has found that exposure to glyphosate-based herbicides, including Roundup, causes reproductive and developmental effects in both male and female rats at a dose level currently considered safe in the US. That's 1.7 milligrams per kilogram of body weight per day. End quote. Just let that sink in for a moment. Exposure to glyphosate-based herbicides caused reproductive and developmental effects in both male and female rats at a dose level currently considered safe in the US. And there is a problem with most toxicity tests. The process works this way. New substance needs to be tested. It is isolated and not tested in connection with other substances already in the environment. So if there are any chemical interactions, we don't know about them. Then a time frame is established for the test, say 90 days, and a dose level. 2 groups of rats are selected for the trial. 1 group acts as a control and receives the standard lab diet. The other group receives the substance, usually in their food or water. Once the 90 days or whatever was selected is up, both groups are checked for changes in physiology. Anything noted is recorded, and the rats are euthanised and incinerated. So if there were long-term effects, there is no way to know, until the substance is loose in the environment, obviously. In this research, the glyphosate was administered from day 6 in utero up to 13 weeks of age. Again, long-term effects, intergenerational for instance, were not tested for, but the results are still terrifying. Quote, exposure to glyphosate-based herbicides was associated with androgen-like effects, including a statistically significant increase in anogenital distance in males and females, delay of first estrus and increased testosterone in females, end quote. To just unpack that a little for those not across the language, the anogenital distance is, quoting from the Wikipedia post, the distance from the midpoint of the anus to the genitalia, the underside of the scrotum or the vagina. It is considered medically significant for a number of reasons in both humans and animals, including sex determination and as a marker for endocrine disruptor exposure, end quote. This means the body displays damage to the endocrine system through the physical dimensions and location of the genitals and the anus. The other point from the study was increased testosterone in females and the delay of estrus. Now in lab rats this is not particularly a problem, but if the same effects are being experienced in livestock, let alone humans, reproduction will be affected. Who knows if this is an accumulated effect over the lifetime of the stock, or even if it affects the DNA and is passed on to offspring. I'm not talking about Lamarckian effects, but changes in the gene switches over generations. And further, this study is one of a number underway and completed. Quote, this is the fourth in a series of related papers from the pilot phase of the global glyphosate study. The first results of the pilot phase of the study were presented to the European Parliament on May 16, 2018. The previous peer-reviewed publications show that exposure to glyphosate-based herbicides leads to other effects, including altering the gut microbiota of rats in early development, particularly before the onset of puberty. End quote. Imagine that. Exposure to glyphosate can alter gut microbiota. All these studies have been in control situations. Imagine a situation where a farm worker with poor literacy skills working alone and mixing the poison to the wrong percentages, or even increasing the concentration in the belief that it would, in inverted commas, work better. I'm sure there are many individuals who have been exposed to far greater concentrations of glyphosate than the US recommended safe level. Moving away from all the pesticides, herbicides and fungicides is a priority. The usual screams of people will starve are complete nonsense. The world transport systems are sufficient to move food surpluses to food shortages. It's just a matter of political will. And it's that political will that's led to a famine in Yemen at present, or lack of political will perhaps. It will take time to change farming systems from industrial chemical to regenerative, but it can be done. Given the amount of money flowing through the EU and the US farm subsidy schemes, it is just a matter of political will. We need to get this started. We probably need to get it started 20 years ago, but today is better than tomorrow. And on that note, I'll draw this episode to a conclusion. Remember, decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Still got the podcasting checklists. If you're interested in starting your own podcast, they're available over at John Moore Podcasting Services, link in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week.